Let's go ahead and plug this in so I can actually hear you. Uh, uh, right ear, left ear. Okay, how are you?
What's up, bro?
Oh, that sounds good. Sounds good. Um, I'm pretty inebriated right now.
Oh, that was probably not a wise decision.
Yeah, it was not.
See?
Look at you. Look at you with your little. That see now that's actually for when you're speaking directly on the mic.
Right.
So I mean, if you're speaking on the mic, that's a much clearer sound. So you probably want to bring it a little bit closer to yourself. So like really, for any podcast, I'm going to want to have it right about here, um, which is why I'll probably lean in. And right now, again, so do that sound for me real quick. I want to sound well. I didn't get my thing today.
You can
Okay,
still see. You're not going to get the pop, but you're still going to hear the wind.
Okay, so if you're doing it directly like that, you'll hear it. But if you're just talking and the P comes up in the word, like right now, you're hearing it more on mine.
Right. And if I were to say people, you don't really get a pop.
Right. Yeah. And so if I say people, people. Yeah. And there it is. So,
Yes.
oh my gosh. Okay. Okay. Hold on one sec. Saying goodnight to some people over here. So I don't know if you saw my Facebook today. I had some really cool experiences. I'll put that right there. Boop. Let's turn up the gain. Can you hear me okay?
Yep. I have my gain all the way up.
Oh, do you?
Mm-hmm.
How am I right now? How's the sound right now?
Good.
Okay, cool. So I can just talk normal. Yeah, this morning I had a meeting at the NAACP, which is pretty cool because I've never been. And it was kind of cool to get out a little bit about what they're focusing on. They're focusing on they talk about community initiatives and then how other community initiatives are affecting the African American community or just minority culture in general. And so they were talking about a group of lawyers who were working through the NAACP to get the criminal records of certain black men and women to get their criminal records expunged. And he was talking about how many of them have, when they were younger, generally written bad checks, and those checks bounced. And then I guess what was happening is they were bringing these cases before these judges. The people were being called to account for it. They were bringing these cases before these judges, and the people were being encouraged to just cop a plea because if you just say I'm guilty, I'm sorry, it'll never happen again. They're playing it up as hey, you can move on from this. You can get a new start. It was years ago, whatever. But bouncing a check is a federal offense. So if you cop a plea, a federal offense. It's a federal crime. And so I guess this is being used as a concerted effort to remove the rights of minority people to vote. And so these lawyers have been like, we've been around for years. We have seen this as we're waiting to present our case to the judges. They bring in these easy cases where people are pleading out, and they'll be waiting for these other cases that judges don't want to see, I guess, and they'll bring in these easy plea cases, like 50 of them, before they'll hear this other case that they need to argue before the judge. And meanwhile, it's like 50 people will go in, 50 people will cop a plea, and 50 people lose the right to vote. And they were talking about how it's kind of a new Jim Crow in a way. And then they also talked about this new development downtown, the Brush Park development, that's going to be built in this old historic Detroit area that has been dilapidated for years, but used to be a mansion district. Like Albert Kahn used to live there. Henry Ford had a house there, and a few other notable people who were part of the auto industry are going to be living there. So So it's kind of cool. Kind of cool. So, but yeah, that was not why I wanted to talk. Sorry, that's the alcohol. But no, then I talk. I'm telling you about my day a little bit. Then I talked to 160 students. They were like sophomores and juniors from different colleges around Michigan, and some of them from out of state at Price Waterhouse Cooper.
Oh, yep, I see that.
Yeah, and so that was really, really cool. When that was done, I just got to go and talk for 15 minutes about why I love the city and things to do in the city. And so we did it at the Joe Louis Arena, right? And so when we were done, there were a couple people there who work for Joe Louis Arena, and I said, hey, when you get new players, how do you acclimate them to the city? And they're like, well, we're kind of working on that. I'm not really sure how HR does that. And I said, well, look, when the Tigers have a new player, we take that player and their wife and their kids around the city. If the Pistons have new players, we take them around the city. If the Lions have new players, we take them around the city. We would love to be a place, a resource for you to help get your new players and their families acclimated to the city of Detroit. And they were like, absolutely, we would love that. Also, have you ever done a tour of the Joe Louis? And I said, no, never have. We would love for you guys to conduct tours here of the building. I was like, yeah, absolutely. And all of these people are being moved from the Joe 2 years from now over to the new Red Wings arena. And so that would give us a foot in the door to give tours of that new facility. So I'm really excited about the relationship that was built there. And then I had another meeting down at Mexican Village today. So right after that, I had dinner with Jen because she's working overnight for the next 3 nights. And then I met with a friend of mine, Alyssa, for drinks at the bar by our house. But I already had 2 sangrias in Mexican Town. So when I met with Alyssa, who works for DTE, she's over a program at DTE. So we're kind of working together. And I was like, look, I don't have time to meet with you in the office today. We just meet for drinks and talk some of this shop. So we did that. And I'm feeling okay.
You a little buzzed?
Oh, yeah. Oh, God, yes. God, yes. But here are some names that I was thinking about for the new podcast. So just kind of tell me your basic thoughts on some of these. Hold on one sec so I can see you. I'm going to bring this over. I'm going to change bring that over. Bring this over. I can see you better. All right. Did you already play around recording stuff to see how it sounded?
Not really.
No. Yeah. I haven't either. I thought I'd be like, oh man, this is going to be amazing, but I didn't.
No, I didn't. That is something that I will be doing at some point in time.
Okay. So I've got 4 names in the bucket right now, but I don't know if you'll like them or not. I want to come up with an idea of a name that we can both agree on that seems to work for us. The first one I came up with was Reasoned Defense with Cal Moore and Justin Imers.
Okay.
The second one is Postmodern Apologetics with Cal Moore and it's always going to be with Cal Moore and Justin Imers. Or it can be with Justin Imers and Cal Moore. I don't care. Making the Case with Cal Moore and Justin Imers. And then Finding Truth with Cal Moore and Justin Imers. So
it's a tie between 2 and 4 for me.
2 and 4. Okay, so 2 is Postmodern Apologetics with Cal Moore and Justin Imers, and Finding Truth with Cal Moore and Justin Imers.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, those are just some ideas too. I mean, if you want to, I say sleep on them for the night and maybe think of some other ones.
No, I know when I like something and I know when I don't like something. There's no reason to sleep on anything.
Okay. All right.
I've learned through doing, when you do startups and entrepreneur, I'm a person who just kind of goes with my gut. So like when I did stuff for the Nerdy Theologian, I didn't sit there and bank on the name for an hour and a half. I just went, yeah, that'll work. And it just happens to everybody. A lot of people seem to like it. So,
okay.
So let me give you my reasons for why I like each one of those.
Okay.
Like postmodern apologetics because it immediately tells the audience that we are going to be approaching apologetics from a different angle than what you're generally going to see. So, and what's interesting is that we're probably not going to attack it a whole lot differently from people like Ravi Zacharias, who's basically already doing this.
Right.
But he hasn't put the postmodern attachment to it yet, which is really smart because he's getting people to work with him who are afraid of that word postmodernism, even though he's like being a pushing force towards postmodern, like postmodern thought in the religious apologetic worldview. So it's interesting that that's the way he's doing it. And then the other one, Finding Truth, that I like that one because it allows us to do more than just apologetics. It allows us to go into epistemology, and it allows us to go into conversations about how do we know stuff? How do we know what meaning is? How do we know what we know? Like, these are not things that we talk about generally, and it's things that people should. This used to be standard elementary and junior high academics, was the philosophy of Plato and Aristotle and Thomas Aquinas. And I mean, that used to be standard stuff where people used to talk about how do we know that something is true from a philosophical point of view. And Christianity is a philosophical worldview.
Right.
So if you don't understand epistemology, and you don't understand ontology and teleology, and you don't understand how all of the ologies work together to create something comprehensive and yet biblically consistent, then you're going to always have an issue when people come to you and ask you a question and you go, I don't know. Or when people come and say to you, hey, there's this contradiction in scripture, how do you answer this? You know, and if you don't have a worldview that if you don't have a whole worldview, in other words, what I want to do is I really want to press a holistic approach to apologetics, not
You're hitting
just
your microphone.
I'm hitting my windscreen thing. It's obvious I need to put it on the other side. But it's one of those things where I really want to impress upon people an entire worldview. I want to be holistic about this. We can systematize, by separating and talking about little things at a time. But we always want to press the fact that this is only one part of the greater whole, and that in order for this part to work, it also needs the other parts. This is not something that this is not a closed system in and of itself. I think one of the problems with some doctrines that the church has, like Calvinism and Arminianism, is that they work great within themselves, but when you bring other doctrines and theologies that are orthodox to the church, then all of a sudden we start to have some issues. And to me, that shows a fragment in the worldview of a Calvinist or an Arminian versus someone who doesn't necessarily ascribe to those names.
Right.
It just goes by what text says. And, Arminians want to ignore predestination and election, even though it's clearly within biblical text. And Calvinists want to ignore free will theology, even though it's a very real human experience. I don't think Scripture wants us to ignore human experience. It wants us to interpret human experience through the story of Scripture. And when we don't allow text to do that, we have a tendency to have issues. Oh, you're gone. You just
Can you hear me?
go. Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. I couldn't tell whether the flashing button was
Yeah, the flashing button is mute.
okay, got it. Yeah, I was like, all right, this is the first time. What I want to start off with, and I'll have a script together by tomorrow night or Thursday.
Okay.
Friday at the latest. I'd like to start recording next week.
Okay.
But what I want to start off with is first, what is apologetics? Of course, first I want to introduce who we are, tell our story a little bit. So that'll kind of be the first episode. The second episode would be, what is apologetics, or a continuation of that, because I think we can kind of get into that after we introduce ourselves in the first podcast.
Right.
But I want to kind of dive deep into that. And then the third one, I want to kind of talk about the necessity of it. There's a book that I have, interestingly enough, called Finding Truth. I can't give it the name. Hold on one sec. Let me grab it real quick.
Okay.
I've actually got an entire section of apologetics books off to my left. I've got like the Baker Encyclopedia of Apologetics, a dictionary of early Christian beliefs. I've got McGrath's Christian Theology. Of course, I have Josh McDowell's Evidence Demands a Verdict. I've got a book called Atheist Delusions, Rice Broocks, God's Not Dead, Veith's Postmodern Times, Benefit of the Doubt, The End of Apologetics, which is an interesting book, interesting take on apologetics. Then, of course, kind of some of the cheesy ones like Cold Case Christianity, a detective looks at, the claims of the gospel, the kind of gimmicky stuff that people buy and then never actually read.
Or buy and then read and then regret that they read it.
Right. Yeah. But one of my favorite people is Nancy Pearcey. She wrote How Now Shall We Live with Chuck Colson.
Okay.
Which was a very, very formative book for me. But this book just came out, and I've got 10 copies because I was going to do a giveaway. And apparently, David C. Cook did not understand that when I do a giveaway, I want to send them the addresses of the winners and for them to send out the winners. But they sent me 10 copies of the book to send out myself. And we never ran the contest, so I just have 10 extra copies. So if you want one, I've got it.
Yeah, I would like one.
It's a good, nice sized book here. And it's 5 principles for unmasking atheism, secularism, and other God substitutes. And so really the first episode after we talk about what is apologetics, I want to kind of begin to unmask for people what those false gods are so that we can begin to address why apologetics is important, what it is speaking into, who it is speaking to, what questions it's trying to answer.
Mm-hmm.
I think that'll be a really good angle to take. And then from there, we can kind of go back and forth I'd like to always kind of include something from the culture to show why this matters. Like right now, I think you may have seen this on Facebook because it was that big of a study. Pew Research Journal showed today that less people are Christian.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, we know this, right? We know this. And so, it's nothing new for us. It's pretty much the same report they keep coming out with every few years. Like, yep, even less Christian than we were before. And so,
as if we were really that Christian to begin with.
I mean, well, you have less people identifying as evangelical. Not everybody was evangelical before, right? So you have a lot less people identifying as specifically evangelical Christian. So that is a change. That's interesting and needs to be taken note of. Not saying, America's a Christian nation or anything. We're talking about evangelicalism specifically, and the rise of the nuns, the people who are not affiliated at all with any kind of, or checking the box nun. When it's
because they don't know how to think about anything else.
Oh, I mean, you could say that, or you could have people who
no.
thinking about it. And
I'm speaking from a academic, factual perspective. The way that we educate children now, we do not educate them in how to think. We don't teach them how to think about things. We just teach them what to think and how to get to that point in thinking. We don't teach them the theory of thinking. And that's why we have a lot more nuns nowadays than we used to, is because the theory of thinking, teaching that, which is what we call epistemology, or how we know things, We don't teach that in secondary and elementary education. We don't teach any of that kind of stuff anymore. The first time that you're going to hear even the word epistemology is going to be in your college. And that's only if you're within particular avenues of, so if you're in education, if you're in philosophy, if you're in religion, if you're in history, you're going to hear epistemology. If you're in math, if you're in science, if you're in any math or any science of any kind, you will never, ever hear of the word epistemology. You'll never really know the theory of thinking. That's why scientists don't understand. That's why people who are scientifically minded and have advanced degrees in science don't have an understanding of, okay, you do understand that how you're understanding the data which you're bringing forward to me right now is completely and totally convoluted by your preconceived notion of the fact that you think the only thing that can be told as honestly true is that which can be seen, felt, touched, taste, smelled. That's a preconceived notion that you have developed that muddies your thought process as to what is truth. And because of that, that's a presupposition that you hold. So don't sit here and act like religious or religious theologians or philosophers are the only ones that hold presuppositions. We aren't. You guys hold presuppositions too. And I would challenge that your presuppositions are far less warranted than my presuppositions. And that's where we get into the conflict and the discussion of epistemology and how we think about things. People don't know how to do that anymore.
Right.
Okay. And that's why you have more nuns.
And in the podcast, I don't want to avoid words like epistemology. But I also want to avoid words like epistemology. I want to be able to communicate. Yeah, I want to communicate it without. It's the thing.
Well, all we say is, how do you know something is true?
How do we know that we know? How do we know what we know?
Right. So I'm talking to you. So I'm using all the words.
You're using a word that I understand, right?
Okay.
But in the
podcast, obviously, we're not worried about whether or not we're sounding intelligent. We're worried about whether or not we're being clear and making sense to people who can understand.
I think we could use it. Again, I don't want to talk down to people. I want to say, how do we know what we know? I mean, in philosophy, we call it, we call it epistemology, but here we're just going to say, how do we know what we know? We can even say that. And so someone might be, inclined to go look up epistemology and run that way. But at least we're bringing the cookies down to someone's level so they understand, hey, this is what they're talking about. They're not using huge hoity-toity words, but they're also not treating me like I'm an idiot.
Right.
I can understand. He's using a little bit more syllables here instead of some big $50 word. He's using a $5 phrase. Because that'll do, and I can get that. I think that's kind of the direction I want to go, and I said that I think earlier when we were talking on the phone. So I definitely want to. I like the idea again of the fact that you bring more academic theology to the table than I do, because you've gone a little bit further in that. Or at least your master's degree focused a little bit different than I did. I think my master's degree at Rochester was a total waste, to be honest. Although it did make me more hospitable. There are some things that stick with me, but overall, I'm just like, man, this is a completely non-viable master's degree.
Yeah.
Rochester. Maybe within the Churches of Christ, it might be great, but I really just don't think so. Which is why I'm going on for 2 more, right?
Well, I thought it has potential, but I think the problem is that it still lacks focus.
It really does, and it's actually the work that you're doing is to bolster the think tank of people who are doing their own doctoral studies. Mm-hmm. They're using your information that are coming from the church, which is why these are very church-based things. Like everything is focused on your experience within your church, so they can gather data,
right,
for whatever study that they are doing for themselves. That was a final impression I got of my master's degree there at Rochester College, but that's neither here nor there. So I want to focus first on explaining who we are, what is apologetics. Then the second episode would really be kind of deep dive into what is apologetics. Third would be kind of unmasking these God substitutes to kind of reveal why is apologetics so important? I never know is it why is apologetics or why are apologetics? I'm not sure of the language there, so I'll have to look it up, the correct grammar. But why is the study of apologetics so important for?
It would be why is.
Why is okay. Not just the theologian, but the soccer mom, not just the professor or the pastor, but the guy who is working the the assembly line at Ford or GM. Right. Why is it important for everyone? Anybody who professes Christ, why is the study of apologetics important? And then also, why is it important to people why is it important to women? Apologetic. Most people who speak on apologetics are men. And I didn't even think about that, because honestly, when you think about the content and the fact that it's not like an authority thing, depending on where you come down on that, the voice of women in apologetics is very, very slim. Very, very little, very, very low voice, and then also apologetics within minority communities. I only have one book written by an African American who does apologetics. Now, of course, there's Ravi Zacharias.
I was going to say one of the biggest apologetics of the 21st century is an Indian.
And his really speaks into that question of, if you were born in India, you would be Indian. You wouldn't be Christian. And so he kind of like takes that and puts it on his head, and he's one of the foremost authorities on apologetics in the world. But he doesn't speak to a specific community. He speaks to the overarching apologetic community, whereas I think that there is a necessity for apologetics in an urban context within minority groups, because of the realities and the questions that they have are the same, but asked in very different ways. So having minority voices who speak into apologetics, yes, the information is the same, it's just kind of communicated in a different way. And then also apologetics for women, especially women, because I think this book that I read, I think it's called Apologetics for Women or something like that. But that's the tagline. But it's about, speaking into a culture that for many, many years within the church, we have painted women as more emotional. And so the ministries that have been birthed out of churches have been based, not purely in emotion, but very highly emotional, very much about your feelings and not about what is true, what makes sense in the world as it comes to us. And so I think kind of highlighting some of that would be good, which would be cool if we could bring another woman onto the podcast to discuss those things. So that's another question. What do you think about bringing some people on every now and again, or working out some way where we can take questions? I found a way online where people can actually, it's an app basically where they call in their question and it records their question, and then we can actually add it into the recording. So we're like, hey, John called in with this question. Here's John's question, and then I'd add that into the edited thing. It's like, hey, Justin, okay, so what do you think of that question? Or hey, wow, John, thanks so much for calling in. Thanks for giving your question. So it adds a displaced call-in section of the show. Mm-hmm. So meaning it's not live.
Right.
So they can call in, they can leave that, we can add it, and kind of go from there. What are your thoughts on that kind of thing?
I'm totally for it.
Okay.
Yeah, no, that's a great idea.
Oh.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And I do think it would be a good idea, obviously. So if we're dealing with, obviously if we're dealing with minorities and apologetics, you got that covered.
I do.
But if we're talking about women in apologetics, then it would be kind of cool we should definitely have a woman present, talking about that. I don't know necessarily how we do that.
This is Google Hangouts, so I would probably interview someone, or not interview, call them way in advance, because I found out there's a whole network of female apologists. And I'm
There we
super
go.
impressed with them. And so now that we have Google Hangouts, being able to get somebody to hop on board, yeah, the audio is not going to be the same because you and I have these badass microphones.
Because you and I being all professional up in this place.
they may or may not have that. They may or may not have that. So I would expect the audio to be a little bit different. Just as anybody doing the call in, the audio is going to be different as well. So that it sounds like they're calling in on a phone, which is kind of cool. It's an added benefit. But having someone on for a particular episode where it's a female apologist, where we're talking about issues pertinent to the female gender in regards to, how do we conceptualize the faith and talk about it rationally with our friends, with the other soccer moms, with, the people that we work with at work. Obviously, again, the content is the same, but speaking into a particular, the female culture within the church, I think has been, again, encouraged to rely more on emotion than on intellect. And I think it needs to be a mix of both.
And I think that really depends on what part of the church you're kind of in.
Right.
So, but I think that I mean, most people are going to ask the question of, well, what do you mean a female apologist dealing with issues that are related to the perception of females? Like, well, what questions could they possibly have that are different from a regular, like from a white male like me? And just having them on to explain that portion of it would be incredibly beneficial because, we can, what I would love to do is I would love to kind of unwrap something in one episode and then continue to do other things. And then later on, get into the nitty gritty of that particular topic again, and maybe play bits back from the previous podcast to kind of bring it around. So that way there's been some time between the two, but at the same time, you've got this kind of tie-in between them. So that way we're understanding the perception that's being given, of a woman apologist and why that's important. And then we bring that same apologist back on, and then we begin to talk about what those issues, are and how we address them. Okay.
There's also the idea of, and this is totally not even my idea. I'm taking it from another apologetics show that kind of went the way of the dinosaur. They kind of fell apart. But these guys that I know, one of the guys was the author of a book called How to Talk to a Skeptic, which came out on Baker Books. And I interviewed him. He's a really good guy. His name is Donald J. Johnson. And they would kind of talk about stuff going on in the culture. I'm beyond, I kind of already alluded to this with the Pew Research Journal, but that's specifically talking about religion. But just kind of talking about, and I don't want to step too much on the toes of the Jacob session, because that's kind of what we do there, right? But the Jacob session isn't necessarily about how do we think Christian, it's not how to teach people to think Christianly. There, we're kind of already thinking Christianly. And we're also showing people how to disagree with each other. Here on this podcast, I kind of want us to have more of a unified front. Not to say that there can't be disagreement, but, coming up with, here's a story I read in the culture, and here is how the Christian worldview presses in on this. Here is why it is important for Christians to be able to think clearly, so that when this comes, these things that just everybody accepts as, oh, that's normal and that's okay. Here's how the Christian worldview speaks into that. And here's why Christians aren't involved in this thing, or here's how come Christians are involved in this thing over here. And we're spearheading. And why do we focus on this thing? Because this is very important, and it's based upon this, and this, and this. And so it's all consistent throughout. Right. And I want to be able to show that Christianity is consistent throughout. But then also, as we gain rapport doing this, because you and I are friends, but we haven't done this specific podcast. Right. So as we get more comfortable with the content of this and defending the Christian faith, even if it's just to each other and maybe occasionally having someone on to interview, I would like to maybe bring on somebody who is Islamic, so that we can talk with them. Like, okay, here's your take. Help us understand. Okay, all right. So how do you answer this? And okay, blah, 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 and so on and so forth. Maybe someone who's Baha'i, maybe someone who's Mormon, maybe someone who's Indian, maybe someone who's fill in the blank, not Christian.
Hindu.
Yeah, Hindu, whatever.
Indian is an
And so,
ethnicity.
blah blah blah. You know what I meant.
That would be like me saying, well, or we could have people with different religions on, like Africans and
Touche. You got me there. Okay. Anyhow, I'm super tired. I need to go to bed because I got an early start. But so it's fine. It's either going to be Finding Truth or Postmodern Apologetics. Let me chew on it overnight. I'm leaning more towards Finding Truth because as the word postmodern probably will fall out of parlance after a while, Finding Truth is always kind of like
there's a mainstay to that.
Yeah, it's got staying power.
Yep.
So yeah, it's not nailed down to one time. And if at some point we had to pass this on to somebody else, if we pass this podcast on to new hosts or something down the road, they could be the new host of Finding Truth. And the postmodern times may have already passed. I don't think they will, obviously, but the idea of using that word may have passed.
Right.
So Finding Truth will always kind of be.
Well, I mean, see, look how fast emerging and emergent went. I mean, that was like, what, 10 years?
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like, poof, all of a sudden you just stop hearing about it.
5 years. 5 years, and then it morphed. It morphed into like radical Christianity or whatever. Now that's kind of going the way of the dinosaur.
Well, I think then you get the different what's emergent and what's emerging. So you had McLaren's emerging church.
That was just
which is neoliberalism.
It was just such bullshit, honestly.
I know it really was.
It was an interchangeable term, and they were like, no, it's not interchangeable. It's like, but all the leaders are the same. Brian McLaren, you're all the same people,
right?
Shane Claiborne, but whatever. Anyhow, swearing will not be in the podcast.
No.
But yeah, I'm gonna go, and I will talk to you in the next few days here. Do you have another? Another post for Friday?
Yes, I will have that to you. Oh, dear Lord. I'll try to have that to you on Thursday morning.
Okay, cool.
Thursday or Wednesday, or I might have it to you tomorrow. I got to write a post for my own tomorrow. So I might have to, or maybe I'll do that before I go to bed right now.
All right, I'm heading to bed myself, so I will talk to you later.
Okay, yep.
All right, have a good night. This all sounds great. So, I mean, like, not just what we talked about, but the actual audio sounds fantastic.
Yeah, it does.
I will talk to you tomorrow, I'm sure.
Okay, awesome.
All right, peace.
Later.